What's happening, everybody? It's Sean with Reactions to the Classics, and today we got a reaction to Neutral Milk Hotel and their album In the Aeroplane Over the Sea, brought to us by a friend, longtime supporter, and patron of the channel, Ian. Thank you, Ian. Appreciate you. Appreciate all the patrons who make this thing go. If you'd like to support us in any way, check out the Patreon link below or the patron link on the end screen. Now, I got to tell you, we did an album draft last year at the time of this film, and we did it in 2022. Trey and I went through albums from every single year from 1965 to 2022, and I listened to 30 albums a week, and then we ranked our top 5 each, and so those are up on the channel. And I tell you all that to tell you, this album is incredibly well acclaimed on Rate Your Music, which is something that we use all the time and we'll log a lot of our album listening into. And I mean, it's just all over critical lists, and I'll get on that in a minute. But I listened to this album, as one of my 30 for the week of the year that it was released, and I just wasn't feeling it. I'm like, what in the world? And I thought to myself, I got to go back and really dive into this album because I'm missing something. And then, you just roll on, and I just forgot all about it. So I'm so thankful that Ian brought this to me. So Ian says 1998's In the Aeroplane Over the Sea is an album that sounds like it was recorded on an 8-track in someone's basement. If I had to sum it up in one word, it would be noisy. If they were aiming for lo-fi, they certainly achieved it. Another album that I've listened to hundreds of times since discovering Neutral Milk Hotel from a taster CD given out for free in 1998. I love the live version of O Comely more than any other track on the promo, More Than You Can Ask or Imagine, Blue Rose Record Company's CD. And as a result, bought the album when it came out. The album didn't receive much success at launch, but has received more recognition over time and is worth a listen. Now I got a little info for you that I found. Neutral Milk Hotel was an American band formed in Ruston, Louisiana by musician Jeff Magnum. They were active from 1989 to 1998 and then from 2013 to 2015. Their music featured a deliberately low-quality sound influenced by indie rock and psychedelic folk. Magnum wrote surreal and opaque lyrics that covered a wide range of topics, including love, spirituality, nostalgia, sex, and loneliness. He and the other band members played a variety of instruments, including non-traditional rock instruments like the singing saw, the Uilleann pipes, and Zanzithophone, I butchered that right, which is a Casio digital horn. This album itself began as one of Magnum's home recording projects. In 1994, he released the song Everything Is on Cher Doll Records. The song's exposure convinced him to record more music under this name. In 1996, he worked with childhood friend Robert Schneider to record the album On Avery Island, the album before this, which received modest reviews, sold around 5,000 copies. He then recruited musicians Julian Coster, Jeremy Barnes, and Scott Spillane for the band's second album, this one, In the Aeroplane Over the Sea. While on tour, the band's popularity grew through internet exposure. This negatively affected Magnum, whose mental health began to deteriorate. He did not want to continue touring, and Neutral Milk Hotel went on hiatus shortly after this. During their hiatus, they gained a cult following, and the critical standing of this album rose tremendously. Many indie groups such as Arcade Fire, lots of reviews of them, and the Decemberists, which I have some reviews of them up too, were influenced by Neutral Milk Hotel's eclectic music and earnest lyrics. Neutral Milk Hotel reunited in 2013 and undertook a reunion tour before another hiatus in 2015. They only have 2 albums. The first one, like I said, sold 5,000. This was the other one. More information on this one. It was released in February of 1998 by Merge Records. The music's predominantly indie rock and psychedelic rock and is characterized by an intentionally low-quality sound. They don't have the traditional, they have the traditional instruments, they have all the other stuff. The lyrics are surrealistic and opaque, with themes ranging from nostalgia to love, and were partially inspired by The Diary of a Young Girl by Anne Frank. You didn't see that one coming, did you? It was recorded at Pet Sound Studios between July and September 1997. Producer Robert Schneider worked with bandleader Jeff Magnum to improve upon the low-quality sound of the band's debut album, On Avery Island. Instead of using studio equipment like guitar pedals or effect units to induce distortion, Schneider developed a recording technique that involves heavy compression. Contemporary reviews are mostly positive, but not real high, right? Over time, however, it's developed a cult following, and Magnum struggled to cope with his newfound attention. I kind of talk about this, I'm going to go into it more. He grew tired of performing and explaining his lyrics and disappeared from the public eye. In the years since its release, its critical standing has risen tremendously and has been described by music journalists as a landmark album for indie rock. It's one of the best albums of the 1990s. I wouldn't lie to you, this thing is crazy well acclaimed. Neutral Milk Hotel biographer Kim Cooper believes that In the Aeroplane Over the Sea is one of the most heavily distorted albums ever made, but also notes a lack of equipment such as big muffs or distortion pedals. Magnum liked having a layer of distortion over the music, but Schneider decided to not use standard effects equipment. Instead, he used heavy compression and placed a Bellari RP220 2 mic preamp close to his guitar. Schneider then ran the sound through a mixing console and maxed out the sound on a cassette tape. We're taking it back, right? This process was done for nearly every instrument used on the album. Schneider claimed that the non-linearities of microphone distortion gave the album its unique, warm quality. Magnum wrote the lyrics for every track on the album. The lyrics are surreal and often reference seemingly unrelated subject matter. Fans and journalists have long argued over the exact meaning of the album. Some listeners believe there's a central message found throughout the lyrics, while other listeners believe the album is too abstract to derive meaning from. So you guys know I dive into the lyrics. I won't do that so much on this one. I'll give you some examples. Although there's little concrete information as to the genesis of some of the lyrics, Magnum has stated a major influence was Anne Frank, a teenage girl who died in a Nazi concentration camp. Before recording on Avery Island, the first album, remember, Magnum read The Diary of a Young Girl, a book of writings from Frank's diary, and that she kept what she was hiding during the Nazi occupation of the Netherlands. He was deeply affected by the book and spent, quote, about 3 days crying, he said, having dreams of traveling back in time and saving her. Tracks on this album, such as Holland, 1945, and Ghost, incorporate element of Anne Frank's life into the lyrics. As a result, some listeners have labeled this album as a concept album about that. However, Frank's importance to the lyrics is a subject of debate. Now, when this album came out, Merge, the record company, just pressed 5,500 CD and 1,600 vinyl copies because they expected the similar sales to the first album, right, on Avery Island. These initial projections were correct as the album sold moderately well for the first few months. And just talking about those reviews, like NME gave it a 6 out of 10. Now, Pitchfork was on board early on, and I actually prefer them to any of the major ranking publications, but they gave it an 8.7 out of 10. After the release, we talked about Magnum's mental health deteriorating. He said in a 2002 interview that a lot of the basic assumptions I held about reality started crumbling. He would sometimes shut himself inside his home for days on end and hoarded rice in preparation for the possible Y2K problem. Now, if you lived through that, it was an insane time, boys and girls. Magnum realized he would not be able to continue writing and performing his songs for a public audience, but could not bring himself to tell the band. Some of them had quit their jobs to be in the band, and it seemed impossible to justify a breakup immediately after their first genuine success. Instead, he avoided the topic of new music altogether and increasingly isolated himself. The situation resulted in the unspoken, unannounced breakup of Neutral Milk Hotel shortly after the tour. Right? Just isolate and don't bring it up. People figure it out sooner or later. There's no public explanation for the band's sudden breakup. Some of the group's original fans became angry and accused Magnum of being selfish, while others perpetuated hoaxes around their breakup. The large response helped the band album gain a cult following and converted Magnum into a larger-than-life figure. In the Aeroplane Over the Sea's critical standing rose tremendously in the years after its release. Mark Richardson of Pitchfork awarded the 2005 reissue a perfect 10 out of 10, and they do not hand those out. Despite modest sales projections and never charting on the Billboard Top 200, it has sold over 400,000 copies since, which is crazy, right? Remember, they only pressed 5,500 copies. Started reported sales of over 25,000 copies a year. In the Aeroplane Over the Sea was the 6th best-selling vinyl record of 2008, for example, and its sales helped to contribute to a revitalization of vinyl in the late 2000s. That's crazy, man. This album that no one knew. Now, getting back to the overall rankings, and then we're going to get to the album. Pitchfork initially ranked it at 85 on the list of the best album of the 90s, but moved it all the way to number 4 in its 2003 revised list. Pace similarly ranked it highly, placed at number 2, only behind Radiohead's OK Computer. Rolling Stone and NME ranked it at 376 and 98, respectively, on their list of the 500 greatest albums of all time. So I know that's a lot, but this is a very eclectic album. This is so well thought of. I didn't care for it the first time. I recently did a reaction for another patron, Fetch the Bolt Cutters from Fiona Apple, which also got a 10 out of 10 on Pitchfork. It was the first album in over 10 years for them to do that. Like I said, they don't hand these out. And I didn't like that album. Same thing through the album draft. And I really liked it in retrospectively listening to it like this. So I'm looking for this. It's different listening to it like this. Headphones, total focus, lyrics, even though they might not be that important, you're just in it, right? And I was very fascinated and did tons more research than I shared with you. But the music will not be in the video. It will be at a Vimeo link below. Click on that if you want to listen along with me. Now, there is not much research on the songs. That's why I covered it all up front. Let's kick this off with The King of Carrot Flowers, Part 1. Ian has comments on every song, and then he grades every song, which I love. The album kicks off with a trilogy, some good vocals with orchestration, transitioning into parts 2 and 3. He gives this one a 7 out of 10. I guess I'll stop between them, but I was kind of going back and forth on that, whether I should or not. You know what? I'm just going to roll through it. We'll just go on the fly. So parts 2 and 3 are going to follow this. They're actually songs 1 and 2. Ian says on parts 2 and 3, unsure if this is a romantic love song or proclamation of joyous faith. The trumpet energy filled build up to part 3 is just great. Part 3 gets a bit too noisy and lo-fi for my taste, but the overall effect of this song carries me away. 8 out of 10. So it goes 7 out of 10 and 8 out of 10. I'm going to have the lyrics up as always. Thanks again, Ian. All right, King of Carrot Flowers. We did parts 1, 2, and 3. Part 1 is, quote, the first track, and parts 2 and 3 are the second track. I'm glad I did it that way. Part 1 got a little bit of Anne Frank in there, a little bit from Jeff's childhood. That's kind of and he's with a girl, and they have a great bond, and then it finishes off with his parents kind of fighting again. So I really like that. We go into part 2, and he starts out, part 2 is only verse 1, right? I love you, Jesus Christ, Jesus Christ. He talked about this in an interview later on. The thing about me singing about Christ, I'm not saying I love you, Christianity. I'm not saying I love all the effed up, terrible stuff that people have done in the name of God. I'm not preaching belief in Christ. It's just expression. I'm just expressing something I might not even understand. So he kind of gives a little light on the song because it says it's a song of confusion. It's a song of hope. It's a song that says this whole world is a big dream and who knows what's going to happen. Now, I'm a Christian, but I'm not offended by him doing that and saying that. We go to part 3, and then he just kind of got a little bit of Anne Frank in there, and then just some other maybe sexual connotations, not in an overtly sexual way, and then just basically saying this world is one kind of cycle of things, right? So yeah, man, I really enjoyed that. I enjoyed the different tempos. Boy, they showed us a lot in 3 parts. Next up, we have the title track in the Aeroplane Over the Sea. Ian says, title track in a pleasant and tuneful song that ebbs and flows between meandering chorus and verse. He gives an 8 out of 10. I found that Jeff wrote the song almost instantaneously while staying in Athens, Georgia with fellow musicians. It was written soon after he became romantically involved with Laura Carter. While sitting in the yard of their Athens home, he suddenly announced, I got a song in my head, and he ran inside the house to play the song for the first time. It makes a brief reference to Anne Frank. It is about a young man who realizes that one day he's going to die and accepts the idea. That's what they say. Let's see what we think. All right. That song was fantastic. And that weird instrument in there was the singing song. I didn't even talk about in the King of Carrots parts. We had an accordion, we had bagpipes, and of course horns. So we built on it in this song. And I do think it's about a guy just realizing, that look, this life goes quick, right? You don't think it does. When you hit a certain age, it starts to really go quick. And I mean, it's a well-written song. I've read all this about the abstractness of the lyrics, but it's a really well-written song. Probably a few things, Anna's ghost all around. So there's a little Anne Frank in here, but you're going to die and you're going to go somewhere else. He says, I'll be laughing out loud. When we meet on a cloud, I'll be laughing out loud. Can't believe how strange it is to be anything at all. But just, this life goes quickly. This is where, of course, the album gets the title, because in the Airplane Over the Sea, they're going to throw his ashes out, right? Leave something. I think that's kind of the theme here. Leave something behind that people remember you by. Next up, we have Two-Headed Boy. Ian says, sung and almost shouted at times. The change in tempo works well in the song before it merges nicely into the Fool. He gives it an 8 out of 10. So we'll go ahead and go into the next song, The Fool. Ian says, a slow instrumental that lets you relax from the frantic Two-Headed Boy. Not a song you would listen to, but as part of the album, it works well. He gives that a 6 out of 10. So we'll just segue these two together. And don't worry, this is the first track, Two-Headed Boy here. There's going to be Two-Headed Boy Part 2 to end the album. All right, we'll go into them, separately. We had Two-Headed Boy first. Just acoustic, and Jeff just, as Ian said, almost shouting the song at times, but so powerful. It can be open to a lot of interpretation. I think it is about concentration camps and Anne Frank, but it's interpreted a lot of different ways. And it goes right into The Fool, where we've got bagpipes, trombone, saxophone, accordion, drums, horns, right? Just in general, other horns. And then we got, of course, Jeff's on the bass. So he's still on this song, even though he's not singing. Some people see it as a transition in the part of the album that deals with the subject matter relating to World War II and Anne Frank. The title may imply the foolishness of militarism. The style of the song is also reminiscent of the jazz-laden funeral processions of Jeff Magnum's hometown of New Orleans, Louisiana, which may be they're marching towards their death if these next songs are more literally about Anne Frank. But super, super interesting stuff. Next up, we have Holland, 1945. Ian says, the pace picks up and gives us this banger of a song. 8.5 out of 10 for Ian. I found it was released as their only single. It's one of the album's louder, more upbeat songs, featuring overdriven and distorted guitars. It also showcases fuzz noise on all the instruments, a quality, as I talked about earlier, created by producer Robert Schneider. In 2010, Pitchfork included the song at number 7 on their list of the top 200 tracks of the 1990s. All right, Holland 1945. I mean, two of the verses are about Anne Frank and everything she went through. And then that second verse is about suicide and a family member of a friend of Jeff's who committed suicide. So it's kind of all about that interwoven in the song. I quite like the songwriting on this album. You know, we talked about it a lot at the first, very abstract and people debate. And I get you can debate it, but it's really well done. And just the fact that you could have Two-Headed Boy and then 2 songs later have Holland 1945 with the vastly different styles on them is fantastic. I thought that was a great song. And a little tidbit on it is originally titled Untitled, which our 10th track on this album is actually still titled. And someone that was working on the album gave Jeff the suggestion of Holland in 1945, and he couldn't pick, and he had them written together, and he just went, you know what, I'm going with both of them. So really good song. And you got every kind of instrument on here. Jeff's playing the bowed fuzz bass. We got trumpet, euphonium, the singing saw again, and then trombone, sax, ukulele, and pipes. We got it all on here. And I think that just lends to it too, just the upbeat version of it. Even though the arrangement's upbeat, the lyrics are very heavy, but maybe my favorite song so far on here. I don't know. I mean, there's been a lot of good songs. I can tell you halfway through this album. I was definitely wrong about this album, not to spoil the ending, but pretty obvious. Next up, you saw it below because it rolled to it. We have Communist Daughter. Ian says, not my favorite song on the album, but that might be because it's between 2 of the best. Uh-oh. All right. 6 out of 10 for him. Communist Daughter. I read that a band from Minneapolis actually took their name from the song Communist Daughter. Obviously, there's some sexual connotations in here. This is the first song I have no idea what it's about. Some people say it's about ponders human sexuality, the moral boundaries of society is set on our reproductive organs, with the struggle between fascism and communism in the early 1900s as a metaphor for this. I have no idea. Jeff hasn't said what it's about, but I do like to see what others come up with on this. I actually like the soundscape the best on there, just the ethereal sound of it. You had an organ. I like Julian Coster is just credited on the musicians with noises. You gotta like that. Next up, we have Oh Comely. Ian says the song that got me hooked, he mentioned it in the intro, on NMH from that promo CD back in 1998. I have this to thank for discovering the band, but also, it's important, man. It's one of the songs that motivated me to learn how to play guitar and has a vocal range that I can at least attempt. I think that's something about Jeff's, right? You go like, I can maybe sing along with this. Like, you're not hearing, some of the other singers that we love and going, man, I could replicate this, but you could try this. Love the different sections of the song and also the instrumentation. He gives it a sky high 9 out of 10, and Ian does not hand those out frivolously. You wonder how this album, there's been so many short songs, is 39 minutes long. Well, boys and girls, you now have the answer because this song is over 8 minutes. Oh Comely, which is a complicated story. Anne Frank's all over it. This girl being kind of minimized by this guy and kind of being viewed as an object. So I think it's Jeff kind of doing that with Anne Frank now. And her dad was sexually immoral and all these things going on. It was just a fantastic song. I mean, I can see it did not feel like 8 minutes. I can see why Ian holds us in such high accord. So there's a really interesting story behind this. I just didn't want to share it at the start, but Kim Cooper, who writes a book, 33 and a Third book, has a book on this album, and one of the best-selling books in the series of 33 and a Third, says, surprisingly, Oh Comely at 8:18, the longest song on the album was recorded in a single take by Jeff by himself. The other musicians clustered around producer Robert Schneider in the control booth and in the tiny adjacent room for what they thought was just a test take as Jeff tried out the mic placement. Robert, the producer, remembers feeling claustrophobic with maybe 20 people standing around him. The rooms were laid out so Robert could hear Jeff playing through the speakers, but also ambiently through the air. Although he's only supposed to play a verse or two, Jeff powered through the song, stunning his friends with a beautiful, passionate performance, no less amazing for the uncontrolled moments when he veers out of tune. At the finish, everyone burst into spontaneous cheers and applause. You can hear someone, possibly Scott Spillane, yell, holy ass. If you listen at the very end, you can hear it at the end of the track. The final version is almost exactly what Jeff played that day, with the addition, of course, of horn overdubs and a couple of places where Robert went in and doubled the vocals. So that makes this even more amazing. So Ian, can you play this in one take? I don't know, man. I have confidence in you. Next up, we have Ghost. Ian says some good elements of the song, but it doesn't quite gel together for me. He gives it a 6.5 out of 10, but it's really hard to follow that previous track. All right, Ghost. I should have let it play into the next song on title, but I didn't tell you that up front because it segues into it. You definitely get some Anne Frank things here. Supposedly, Jeff's had an experience with a ghost living in his home. So that's kind of mixed in, but it's mainly about Anne Frank. You get that singing saw that gives it the interesting, you got the fuzziness to it. I actually like this song more, I think, than Ian does, but thought it was really well done. Now we go to that track I talked about earlier, Untitled. It's only a little bit over 2 minutes long. Ian says, love the pipes and the ridiculously over-the-top instrumental here. It feels joyous and avoids being pretentious. He gives it a 7.5 out of 10. All right, Untitled. Just a nice little jam there. Got the bagpipes in there, so there's songs like this. I mean, it's got a little more electronic instrumentation than the Decemberists usually have, but songs like this where I can see their influence on the Decemberists, which I mentioned at the start. And I know it's going to segue into this next track, so I probably should just let that one run, but I didn't. So we have got it finishing with Two-Headed Boy, Part 2. Ian says, not a bad end to the album. Part 2 doesn't reach me like Part 1. He gives it a 7 out of 10. Remember, number 4 track on here was Two-Headed Boy. All right, Two-Headed Boy, Part 2. Obviously about Anne Frank. I'm not going to go all the lyrics. You really felt Jeff's like pained vocals there. I think that was one of the parts that I liked about just finishing off the album with this. It's not going to be on my favorites, but I thought it was a really good song. Okay, now that segues me into my favorite tracks. And there's a lot of them. Honorable mentions The King of Carrot Flowers, Part 1, and Parts 2 and 3, like they're the first two songs. I feel like it kind of has to go all together. And then I'm going to go with Ghost, a song that Ian only gave a 6.5. My faves, In the Aeroplane Over the Sea, Two-Headed Boy, Holland, 1945, and Oh Comely, which is probably the best song on here. Now I'm going to get to my overall score. Before I do that, Ian says, every song feels authentic and is sung with soul and passion, more than enough for me to forgive the odd grating vocal. If it doesn't sound quite right, that is part of the charm. I totally agree with that. I was hooked from the start. It has some top draw, spine tinglers, and works well as an album. It was chronically underrated, but that seems to have been addressed. Hope you enjoy it. Definitely an album that took its time to grow on me, but it still gets played from start to finish regularly, even 25 years later, and gets a 7.5 overall from me. I told you guys at the start, I didn't like this album the first time I sped through it, and boy, was I wrong, right? Boy, was I wrong. And it is a rare occasion where I'm going to give a grade a higher grade than the patron who brought it, right? Because the patron who brings an album, they obviously love it or they wouldn't bring it. So usually their score is always higher than mine. But this is going to be that rare exception to the rule. Ian gave it a 7.5. I'm going to give it an 8.75, which I just don't do on first reactions very, very rarely. But everything that Ian said is true. Like the vocals, the loaf, all of it, it just all works together. It's a start to finish album. I don't know that you're going to pick out many of these tracks and just jam to them. It's definitely a start to finish piece of art, but wow, is it good. Also, let me know your favorites below and what you give this album overall. And thank you to Ian for righting this wrong in Sean's psyche here. I really appreciate that. Thanks to you for watching. Until next time, guys, I will see you.